Well, hello and welcome again to our reading of Thucydides, Book 4, and we're up to chapter 14 in the story of Pylos and Sphakteria. So, Hoida Athenaioi, the Athenians, having realised this, gnontes, main verb here, hoemesa, they set out against them at each entrance. And now our participle here is prospesontes, attacking the majority of them, and then we get a chi and a chi. So both those that were already, metiurus is a funny word here. It literally means raised up high from the ground, but here it's got more the sense that they were already in deep water, they'd already gone clear of the shore. So they attacked the majority, both of those that were already in deep water, those of the ships, and those antiprorus. This means with prows in front, so they're lined up ready for attack. So attacking the majority of the ships, both those that were already in deep water and those lined up for attack, literally they established them into flight, so they put them to flight. And pursuing them, and we get this funny expression here, pos diabrachios, which probably means something like so far as the short distance allowed, hos diabrachios. So pursuing them as far as the short distance allowed, etrosan from titrosko, they wounded them, and we get a men. They wounded polas, many of them, and then the balance in de, but they took 5 ships, and one of them with men and all. So this is that standard use of the dative here. So along with their men, sometimes called a dative of attendant circumstances, I think it's the technical term for it. But en ebalon, now this is a technical word, it means to ram a ship. It's literally to cast your ship in there, so to ram them. And it's imperfect, so they were ramming, it takes a dative here, the remaining ships that were on the land, the remaining ships that had fled, perfect participle here. So they were ramming the remaining ships that had fled to the land. But those also, plerumenai, we've had pleroo is to fill, it's to man a ship. So those still being manned, they cut them off prin anagesthai before they had put to sea. And anadumenoi, this is something like they tied with ropes, certain ones that were empty. So having done that, they dragged them, so they towed them, and so they were towing certain others, having tied them that were empty, having tied them with ropes. And then we get a genitive absolute here, their men having turned to flight. Now we get a relative pronoun here, but we have to understand tauta or something, which is all the bit that's gone before. So the Spartans having seen these things is the easiest way of translating them. So these things which the Spartans having seen, so translated as when the Spartans had seen these things, and perialguntes were very upset, to patho, at the disaster. Pathos is often used in this sense. Being very upset at the disaster. Hotiper. Now this is obelized here in this text because it's only here apparently in Thucydides, but it seems perfectly good Greek. Because indeed it was their own men. That's why it's got the pair, it's emphatic. So they were really upset at the disaster because, in fact, it was their own men were being cut off on the island, and they were rendering assistance and ep eis bainontes, and going in to the sea, and the epi has the sense of against them, but hard to translate here. So going into the sea in full armour, so suntois hoplois. So going into the sea in full armour, they were, perhaps it's imperfect, so they were trying to drag them, understand the ships back, having taken hold of the ships. So having gone into the sea in full armour, having taken hold of the ships, they were trying to drag them back. This next bit's quite difficult, really. It's something like, and at this point, hekastos, each man was thinking. Now I think we have to understand something like tauta, the whole situation, the whole present matter, was brought to a halt. This is a perfect infinitive here. So each man, so at this point, each man was thinking the whole matter to have been brought to a halt, in whichever task he himself also was present. So we're going to a not there, so not present. So literally then, in whichever task he himself was not present. Perhaps the tini in some way. In other words, each man thought that the matters were at a standstill at whatever point he was actively engaged. Sorry, at whatever point he was not actively engaged. The idea, I think, being that they couldn't see what was going on, and they thought it was everywhere else except where they were was a complete disaster. So that's it's a tricky section there. So I might quickly do that again. And so at this point, each man was thinking all things to have been brought to a halt, in whatever task he himself was not present, tini in some way. And there was great turmoil, and we get a genitive absolute here, and literally the affair having reversed, or the manner having been reversed in regard to ships for each side. So in other words, a complete reversal of fighting methods in regard to the ships. And he goes on to explain what he means there. For the Spartans, by their eagerness and their excitement, hos apon alla udin is fairly idiomatic. It means, it's literally thus to speak, nothing other than, and so you paraphrase that by saying one could say that. So one could say that they were fighting from a sea battle from the land, that's from the Spartan side, but the Athenians, who were prevailing, wishing epex elthane, wishing to proceed, hos epi placed on as far as possible in their present good, with their present good fortune. They were fighting a land battle from the ships, which is what he means by that strange section above, where he means that the different natures of fighting on the sea, fighting from ships, had reversed. They were, this is the they were providing much trouble to one another, and having done lots of wounding, inflicting many wounds, they separated. And the Spartans were saved, their empty ships, except those that had been taken first of all. And each side, katastantes, well, something like returned to their camp, es to strapadon. Each side returned to their camp, and this is probably the Athenians here. The one group, the Athenians, set up a trophy, handed back the dead, and took control of the wrecks, so secured the wrecks, and immediately they sailed around the island and put it under guard. Hose, with a genitive absolute here, so as though the men, this is the Spartan men, on it had been captured. But the other group, that's the the Peloponnesians on the mainland, and those now rendering aid, apopanton is fairly vague from all parts, they were remaining on the land at Pylos. And that is the end of that chapter.